Today I wanted to talk to you, or at you I guess, about the masterpiece that is Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. Despite being obsessed with Tudor history, Wolf Hall was a book that I put off, well, until now. But now I've read it, I can hands down say it's one of the best pieces of not only historical writing, but one of the best books ever written. Big statement, but I'm gonna stand by it. As I'm sure you are all aware, Wolf Hall is the story of Thomas Cromwell. Originally, that was the thing that made me a bit unsure whether I actually wanted to read Wolf Hall. Predominantly, the historical fiction or even the history that I've read around the Tudor period has been focused on either people more in the margins of history, for example, women or people of colour, but also just the stories of women within the Tudor court, like the Six Wives of Henry VIII. That has always been my interest, and I think as a person who reads a lot of historical fiction and historical non-fiction, I've always wanted to know more about the underdog. But as soon as I started reading Wolf Hall, I realised that me and Hilary Mantel have a connection in that. Wolf Hall is the story of an outsider. It's a story of a working class hero almost. Whenever I'm thinking about fiction, especially historical fiction, I always go back to one particular part of theory, which is from Eve Sedgwick with Reading Against the Grain. It's something that I followed ever since hearing that at university, about looking for queer stories in particular in fiction and in history, and really challenging the narratives that we've been taken as given, the meta-narratives of society that we have been prescribed. And really, in a lot of ways, that's what Wolf Hall is. Hilary Mantel arguably is writing against the grain, but her lens is fixated on Cromwell. We have condemned Cromwell as a hard, evil, calculating man, a murderous man. There's a brilliant bit in the book where Cromwell has a portrait, a miniature done of him, and he says, "I look like a murderer," and his son says, "Yes, don't you know that?" The image of Cromwell that we have also really comes from that portrait by Holbein. Hilary Mantel shows us that Cromwell, but she also shows him as a talented man and a pragmatic man rather than calculating. She's sympathetic, but she doesn't glorify, she humanizes. Even though Mantel is sympathetic, there's still so much ambiguity with Cromwell's character. She doesn't shy away from his actions or his deeds. She doesn't miss stuff out because it makes Cromwell look bad. What I think is important to note with our perspective that we come to in this novel, and with the particular gaze that is on Cromwell, is the fact that in this novel we aren't Cromwell, we're an observer. We see the world through Cromwell, but not as Cromwell. The way Hilary Mantel writes that is masterful. And when I think about the writing, I was so often in Tudor England. I felt like I was there. I felt like I could smell it and feel it. It is so evocative and atmospheric, but it builds tension throughout this novel. And normally I come to associate that kind of really strong placement with novels where I am the character. And Hilary Mantel's writing, this book is a masterpiece. Well, I think it is. And I will never get over just how good it is. But anyway, back to my point. Because we aren't Cromwell, we're just seeing Cromwell. We are an observer of this world that he enters. Our status as an observer is also very much like that of Cromwell himself. We are outsiders. The thing that fascinates me with this novel, and also why I think Hilary Mantel is reading against the grain to a certain degree, is that Cromwell is a working class man who makes his way up in the Tudor court. Even though he becomes Henry's right-hand man, he will never be, Thomas More. He will never have the privilege that has come through the church or going to Oxford. He will always be the son of a blacksmith in Putney. This gives us a really unique look, I think, at the Tudor court, at the power plays, the structure of this world. We're seeing it from the perspective of someone who is also kind of like us, in the way that, we're all not at home sitting reading on a throne. We are seeing it with a pinch of salt that Thomas Cromwell is also viewing it as. We are also constantly reminded in the novel that he isn't of the same amount of privilege, because the novel, the way Hilary Mantel plays with kind of temporality and the fiction and the history of Thomas Cromwell's life is so fascinating, because we don't just follow the line in the linear narrative. We don't just start from the beginning and move forwards. We are constantly taken back to Thomas Cromwell's beginnings, or the impact, the marks that his childhood and, you know, his kind of travels left on him. Hilary Mantel plays with temporality. She bends fiction, I guess, and she does it throughout the series, and there are almost reimaginings as well of history. This novel is, you know, it's about a maker of history. Thomas Cromwell makes and shapes English history, but also Hilary Mantel does. Hilary Mantel invents Thomas Cromwell. She has reinvented him. Thomas Cromwell will never look the same to us. The ambiguity of Thomas Cromwell also comes from the fact that there are key facts missing about his life, and Hilary Mantel brings that up, and she really shows us the gaps that are in the historical record and the moments of erasure. But there are simple things that Hilary Mantel brings up, which I found fascinating, like the fact that, you know, we don't know Thomas Cromwell's mother's name, and we don't know his birth date. Hilary Mantel sees that gap in the historical record, but she makes that a part of the whole reinvention of Cromwell. We know that his birth date was potentially given to him by his sister, or Thomas Cromwell guesses kind of that's when he was born. From the very beginning, there has been moments of self-invention. In the same way of these kind of stories being invented, you know, there are stories, and the reputation of Cromwell almost precedes him with Wolsey, and the stories of his character, which also form my understanding of him as a historical figure today. These different inventions is probably, I think, my favourite thing about Hilary Mantel's writing, and it's something that I've noticed that she does a lot in these novels, but also phenomenally well, in the way that she, as a, you know, historical novelist, works obviously with the historical record, but she presents the gaps in the record to us. She doesn't try and avoid them. She brings them to us on a plate and says, we're not quite sure when this happened. We're not quite sure these circumstances. And she creates a narrative around that. That is key, because I think it says a lot about Hilary Mantel, in the way that you can see that she's constantly doubting the historical record. She's doubting who made note of it, what bias or perspective they put on that record. And I think we're very aware of the Tudor propaganda, the spin, the fake news, if you will. The way we look at historical figures depends on our own biases. We can make them into different people depending on what we want from them, and she doesn't shy away from that, but she kind of revels in it. The other thing that I found really fascinating about this novel is the amount of ghosts that are in there, and Hilary Mantel talks about ghosts quite a lot. I went to see her a couple of years ago in the South Bank, and I hadn't read any Hilary Mantel at this point. She talked about how she went to visit a house that was also important in one of the novels, or a setting that was historically important, and she noticed that there was like a paw print in the cement from like the 16th century, and she said from that point, you know, that dog was almost a ghost of the past, but yet was here with us, and that she could see the evidence of them being alive. There's a lot of reference to St. Augustine with the idea that their dead are merely invisible, they're not absent, and this is so true in Hilary Mantel's writing. There are lots of occasions where the dead and the living almost pass each other. The betrayal in grief in this novel killed me. The death of Cromwell's wife and his daughters made me cry. That's the thing, I'm saying all this stuff about how she makes fiction and makes history, but the book is beautifully written in that it is also incredibly emotional. Because she humanises Cromwell, the way she does that has an emotional hit that I will never forget. Because of the emotion that she instills within these pages, Cromwell's wife never feels that far, or his daughter, I think it was with the prayer book, he feels like she's there. It's the same with Wolsey. I mean, Wolsey is like the main ghost, surely, of this novel, that never quite leaves Cromwell. the ghosts in the novel aren't necessarily always people that have died. You know, Thomas Cromwell's ghosts are as much about his childhood and the previous lives that he lived, and the way, you know, his life goes in this novel is always marked by the history that he's come from. And the ghosts, therefore, are as much the gaps in the historical record. To conclude this video about the historical record, if you've been against the grain or ghosts or whatever this video has turned out to be, Wolf Hall is one of the best historical novels, one of the best novels I've ever read. It achieves a thing of power and beauty, and that is, even though we know that Thomas Cromwell will be executed, we know that Anne Boleyn will be executed. In this novel, you forget. When you are in the pages and following from the beginning of the story, you are hopeful. We forget the thing that we know, which is the fate of Thomas Cromwell.